She woke to the sound of thunder, not from the sky but the earth, hooves, dozens of them, maybe more. The ground trembled beneath her cabin floor as a low, rising chant echoed through the dawn mist. She flung open the door, heart pounding, and froze. 100 Mustangs circled her home, their riders silent and still as statues. Faces painted, eyes sharp, spears glinting with dew and memory. They had come for her, the same tribe whose dying chief she had once saved. Now they stood here like ghosts from another world, like warriors torn from the pages of an old dream, or a bad omen. Her shotgun was within reach, but so was the chief's. Medicine pouch, the one he had pressed into her hand with his final breath. No one had spoken. Not yet. Then one rider dismounted. A young woman, eyes lined with grief and fire, approached the porch. "You carry his breath now," she said. "And his promise." The wind shifted. The Mustangs snorted and pawed the earth. And the nurse knew this was not a threat. This was a summons. Tell us where you're watching from before we ride into this twisted tale, and subscribe if you love the West. Her name was Evelyn Hart. Before the war, before the fire, before the fever took her husband and the child they hadn't even named. She was someone people invited to church picnics. She had a warm smile and clever hands. Her voice was steady, her dresses pressed. That was before the nights turned long and the light inside her flickered out. She came to Dry Creek 5 years ago, hitching a ride on a westbound wagon full of potato sacks and a widow with a dead mule. Evelyn had traded her wedding band for a pair of leather boots and never looked back. The townspeople had been polite at first. A nurse was useful. Babies still came into the world out here. People still fell off roofs and broke ribs. Fevers didn't care if you were rich or poor. But Evelyn's usefulness didn't buy her belonging. Not here. She walked with a limp now, subtle, but enough for children to notice and mimic behind her. Back. It came from a shrapnel wound, they said, or a horse that kicked, or something worse. Evelyn never explained. She also didn't hear out of her left ear. Too many nights spent beside artillery in her husband's field hospital. Too many. Screams soaked into her bones. When folks talked on that side, she tilted her head slightly, like a dog waiting to understand. There were no friends. Not really. Just patients who nodded politely if they saw her in town, and then whispered once she passed. No church pew held a space for her anymore. No one invited her to dance when the saloon strung up lanterns and fiddlers came down from 40. Sumner. She was alone, and she had accepted it. Her days were quiet, filled with herbs, bandages, and letters she never mailed. She collected river stones and pressed flowers into medical ledgers no one read. At dawn, she brewed chicory over the stove. At dusk, she stitched cotton dresses from old feed sacks. And in between, she walked the ridgeline, or rode her mare to old campsites where arrowheads and broken bottles told stories that were never hers to know. Every so often someone would knock on her door, bleeding, fevered, or near death, and she'd open it without a word. Her hands were always calm. Her eyes rarely met theirs. She never asked for payment, but she kept one drawer locked. Inside it was a red sash, an old photograph, and a letter burned around the edges. The rumors came with the wind, as they always do. Apache have been spotted near Muleskull Ridge. Bandits went missing down by the chasm trail, some say. The spirits got 'em. A chief was wounded. Real bad. Don't know how he's still breathing. Evelyn didn't listen to rumors. But one night, a boy barely old enough to ride came pounding on her door. His eyes wild, his voice torn between languages. "You come, now, big man dying." She hesitated. Not out of fear, but recognition. She'd seen that look before. In war. In the faces of mothers who knew their sons wouldn't make it through the night. In soldiers begging her to write letters they couldn't finish. She grabbed her bag. No questions. The boy led her deep into the desert, where the stars bled across the sky and the land felt ancient. Evelyn rode in silence, pulse steady, heart strange. She knew she was riding toward something she couldn't explain. When they reached the camp, hidden in a canyon she'd never seen, she saw the man, the chief, broken, dying. She didn't ask how he was wounded. Bullet? Blade? Spirit? It didn't matter. His breath rattled like leaves in a storm. His skin was fire. The tribe looked on, eyes unreadable. And Evelyn worked, for hours, hands moving by memory, sweat running down her back, whispering to a man who couldn't understand her words, but somehow knew what they meant. At dawn, he lived. And nothing would ever be the same. In Dry Creek, they said she disappeared for 2 nights. Some said she'd gone mad. Others said she was taken by spirits, or worse, she willingly rode with Apache. When she returned, she was quiet as always. But she carried something new. A small leather pouch tied to her saddle, beads woven into the strap, and a single feather tucked behind her ear. No one asked, but they whispered louder now. She's not one of us anymore. Was she ever? And as spring turned to summer, something stirred in the wind. The townspeople didn't know it yet, but it was the beginning of the end. Because on the first dawn of August the Mustangs came. The wind changed before the man arrived. It swept down from the high ridges with a weight behind it, a dry, restless hush that rattled porch swings and curled dust around boot heels. Evelyn felt it one morning as she knelt near the river, rinsing bandages in the cold current. A ripple across the water, a shiver up her spine, the kind of quiet that warned you something, or someone, was coming. She didn't look up right away. The world had taught her not to flinch at every shift. But that day her horse raised its head and snorted. A hawk circled once overhead and flew south, and Evelyn turned. He stood on the far side of the river, one boot braced on a flat rock, a worn hat in his hand. Tall, broad-shouldered, his coat was dusted with miles, his shirt threadbare but clean. Dark stubble along his jaw, eyes the color of a storm sky, deep, unreadable. He didn't speak, just nodded once, slow, like he was acknowledging a familiar song heard from far away. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't move. She wasn't afraid. But something inside her leaned forward. Then he crossed the water. The stranger introduced himself as Declan Ward, said he was looking for a place to rest a few nights, maybe more. Evelyn said there was a cot by the stove. He didn't ask about the whispers, the ones that rose behind her like dust wherever she went. He didn't flinch at the feather behind her ear or the pouch she kept tied to her belt, and when he looked at her, he didn't search for the limp. He looked at her eyes, like he was trying to see what she'd seen. He chopped wood the next morning without being asked, fed her horse, fixed a loose hinge on the porch door like it was second nature. They barely spoke. When she handed him a tin cup of coffee, he took it with a quiet, "Thank you," then sat beside her on the steps. No questions. No judgment, just silence stretching. Between them, soft and strangely full. That night, he slept near the fire. Evelyn lay awake longer than usual, watching shadows move across the cabin walls. The wind had shifted again. In town, the stranger's arrival wasn't welcomed. Sheriff Doolin, a barrel-chested man with thinning hair and a broken nose, was the first to take notice. He spat a wad of tobacco onto the dry road and narrowed his eyes. "Don't like drifters," he muttered. "They blow in with the sand and disappear with trouble behind them." Miriam Lowe's, the pastor's wife, told everyone at the general store that she saw the man ride in from the North Trail, Apache territory. "Marked his horse with war paint," she said. "I swear it." Mrs. Cartwright, who ran the bakery, said she'd heard Evelyn was keeping him in her cabin. Alone. "After all those years," she whispered. "Maybe she really is touched." The rumors bloomed like wildfire in drought. Evelyn knew. She felt the weight of their stares even out, in the canyon. But Declan didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He brought in wild onions from the cliffs. He mended a torn saddle strap without asking. And one morning, when he found her outside wincing as she adjusted her leg brace, he crouched silently beside her and waited until the pain passed. "Never seen anyone so still," she said finally, voice low. He looked at her with a small, almost sad smile. Sometimes stillness is the only way to survive. She didn't ask what he'd done before. He didn't ask what she was running from. But the questions hung between them. fragile as spider thread. Late one evening, after supper, Declan sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap. Evelyn stood, in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the sky shift from blue to purple to black. "Why'd you come here?" she asked softly. Declan didn't answer at first, just tapped ash from his cigarette, eyes locked on the horizon. "Looking for quiet," he said. "A place that doesn't ask too much of me." Evelyn tilted her head. "And you think this is it?" He shrugged. "Maybe." Then he turned to her. "You?" She hesitated. The question felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice. "Trying to forget what I can't change," she said. Declan nodded once. "Fair enough." 2 nights later, the trouble came. A rider galloped into town at dusk, shouting about a ranch burned to the ground west of Elk Canyon. Said the attack came fast, silent, arrows, fire, no survivors. Sheriff Doolin rode out with 3 deputies. "Came back pale and rattled. The bodies weren't scalped," he told the mayor. "Wasn't Apache, but that didn't stop the town from whispering otherwise. And when someone mentioned the strange man staying with the nurse on the ridge, all heads turned." The next morning, 2 men rode up to Evelyn's cabin. Clyde Tiller and Jed Harmon. Ranch hands and cowards, both. Their eyes mean. Their hands too close to the pistols on their hips. "We got questions for your guest," Jed said. Declan stepped outside before she could answer. He didn't look afraid. "I've got no business with you," he said calmly. "And you've got none with me." Clyde spat in the dirt. "That so? Strange time for a drifter to come sniffing around a woman who sleeps next to a medicine pouch." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Leave." Jed smirked. "Or what?" Declan's eyes didn't move, but something in him shifted. "Don't make me teach you manners." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Clyde cursed and turned his horse. Jed hesitated, then followed. But Evelyn knew. This wasn't over. That night she sat beside Declan as he cleaned his rifle. The moon cast pale light across the floorboards. "You should go," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "You want me to?" "No," she said, voice breaking. "But they'll come back, and next time it won't be talk." Declan set down the cloth and met her eyes. "Then let 'em come." Evelyn didn't reply, but her hand moved, almost without thinking, and rested lightly on his. Silence again. But not empty. This time it was full of all the things they hadn't said. In Dry Creek, the wind kept shifting, and in the dark, old debts stirred. The Apache hadn't forgotten the woman who mended their chief, and soon, neither would the West. The door slammed behind her. Her breath came fast, raw, like she'd run through fire. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the wall, blood blooming beneath her palm where the knife had caught her. Just a graze, but it felt like betrayal carved into skin. They'd done it. After all these years, they'd finally gone too far. The rumors, the whispers, the stolen glances behind backs. But tonight it wasn't whispers. It was ropes, shouts, a burned cross in the snow outside her cabin. It had started in the town hall, a gathering for safety, the mayor had said. Evelyn had stood in the back, arms crossed, knowing her presence was tolerated at best. But Declan wanted to go, said they should face the talk before it turned to violence. She'd stood beside him, silent, until they brought out the pouch, her pouch, medicine herbs, beads, a hawk feather, sacred items she kept wrapped beneath her cot. They said they'd found it behind McLaren's barn, said it was witch stuff, and that it proved what they'd always suspected, that she was in with the savages. Then Mrs. Lowe stood. She was there when the chief lived, wasn't she? And now he's gone. But she's still got their symbols? Still lives up there like she's one of them? Clyde Tiller shouted from the crowd. What if she called them down on us? What if this stranger's just the start? And then, Doolin stepped forward. Sheriff Doolin, who had once let her suture his gut in her cabin during a blizzard, who had eaten her bread and called her Doc. He raised a stained hand and said, Bring her out. They dragged her outside. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just stood, shoulders back, like a broken fence still refusing to fall. Declan moved to step between them, but a rifle stock caught him in the ribs and dropped him to his knees. They tied her wrists, cut her cheek, and then they spit at her feet. Not one soul said a word for her, not even the ones she'd once healed. She didn't wait for the sentence. She slipped the rope by slicing her wrist on a rusted hinge, and when the sheriff's back turned, she ran into the snow, into the dark. The forest didn't welcome her. It swallowed her. Branches grabbed at her coat. Rocks cut through her thin boots. Her legs, stiff from the brace, faltered. She stumbled, crawled, kept going. The cold didn't bite. It devoured. Somewhere behind her, dogs barked. She didn't know where she was heading, only that she had to keep going. One hill, then another. Her vision blurred. The snow deepened. She fell once, hard. Her knee hit a stone, and a white-hot scream tore from her throat. Still, she crawled. By morning, the storm had moved in. The world was white, silent, swallowed whole. Evelyn lay in a small hollow beneath a cedar tree, half-buried, skin gray, and then, footsteps, soft, measured. A weight knelt beside her. She felt it before she heard him. "Evelyn," he said gently. "Declan." She couldn't speak, but her fingers twitched, like they knew his name. He didn't lift her. He didn't cry out. He just took off his coat, wrapped it around her, and lay beside her in the snow, their breaths rising together like smoke. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Later, when she blinked into the flickering warmth of a fire, she saw him, face red from the cold, hands cracked, kneeling with a pot of snow melt and herbs. "You came," she rasped. He gave a crooked smile. "Didn't much like the way you left." She coughed, winced. "I fell." He reached over, touched her wrist. "You fought." She closed her eyes. "They want me gone." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Then we give them a choice. Learn the truth or be left behind by it." The days passed slowly. He tended to her wound, massaged the bruised leg, listened when she needed silence and waited when her hands trembled. He didn't try to fix her. He simply stayed. The fire crackled between them. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. One night, as snow fell against the windows like soft fists, she whispered, "You know I saved the Apache chief, but you don't know why." Declan looked up. "I wasn't supposed to be there," she said. "They sent me to deliver bandages, but I stayed. I knew they'd call it betrayal, but I couldn't let him die." Declan's eyes didn't change, only his voice did. "Because you saw the man, not the threat." She nodded slowly. "And they saw a traitor in me for that." He stared into the flames. "Then they never deserved you." One morning, she woke to find him outside chopping wood again. Same calm rhythm, same solid stance. But something was different. A line of fresh horse tracks led down the ridge. She stepped outside slowly, cane in hand. "You went into town?" Declan nodded. "Wanted to see who still had a spine." Her stomach turned. "And?" His jaw tensed. "A few do. One or two. But most, still full of fear." She looked down. "It'll never change." He turned to her. "Then let's make something new out there, further than they're willing to ride." She blinked. He wasn't offering rescue. He was offering partnership, not a savior, a choice. That night, they packed what they could. The wind outside had turned cold again, but not cruel. The kind of cold that clears the air. As Evelyn tucked her medicine pouch into her coat, she felt it for the first time in years. Not shame, but strength. Declan caught her hand, held it gently. "We leave at dawn," he said. She nodded, but deep in her heart, she knew they would not leave alone. The cabin stood quiet in the morning glow, smoke curling from its chimney like a soft prayer. But Evelyn didn't pray anymore, not with words. She prayed with hands, twisting fence wire, packing poultices, gathering firewood beside Declan. With every movement she reclaimed what the town tried to strip from her, a piece of herself. He never asked for more than she could give, never demanded she smile or speak or forgive too soon. He just built beside her, board by board, day by day. By spring, a small corral stood behind the cabin. A foal was born, and for the first time in years, Evelyn laughed. Not a dry chuckle or polite smile, a real breathless laugh that caught in her throat like sunlight. Declan had named the foal Hope, but the world, like the wild, always remembers. And one afternoon, it came knocking. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw them. A single rider, cloaked in dust, coat torn at the collar, moving fast. Declan stepped outside just as the man pulled his horse up short, the beast frothing at the mouth. "Marshal's coming," the rider said, panting. "You got 2 days, maybe less." Declan didn't move. Evelyn did. She stepped out of the doorway, wind tugging at her braid. "Who sent him?" she asked. The rider looked at her, surprised. "Tiller. Said you've been hiding enemy medicine. Said your man." He nodded to Declan. "Is shelterin' a threat?" Declan's eyes darkened. Evelyn's spine straightened. She nodded once. "Let them come." That night, the fire in the hearth burned hotter. Declan worked the forge behind the cabin, shaping tools, repairing hinges, hammering out the cold with sweat. Evelyn brewed stronger salves. She counted supplies, wrapped smoked meat in cloth, sharpened her old knife. They didn't talk of leaving. They'd run once, not again. "We could go north," Declan said once, wiping his brow. "Cut through the ridgeline, lose them before the pass." Evelyn stirred the stew. "You want to?" she asked. He looked at her. "I want you. Safe. Seen. Whole." She smiled, a quiet, tired thing. "Then we stay." But staying meant more than waiting. It meant choosing fire over flight. They built what they could. A second pen for the horses, a trench around the cabin, stronger locks. Evelyn sewed a red cloth into the roof's corner, a quiet signal, a color the old tribe might still understand. Declan trained with his old rifle each dawn. She watched him, the way he never smiled while holding it, the weight of some old pain he hadn't shared yet. Not fully. One evening, as the sky bruised into purple, Evelyn found him behind the barn, staring at an old tin badge. "You were Law," she said quietly. He nodded. "Long time ago, in New Mexico. Thought I'd clean up one town, just one, but it cost more than I had." She stepped closer. "What happened?" He didn't look at her. "I trusted someone. He burned the jail to the ground. Took 6 lives with... It said it was my fault they locked his brother up. Said I forgot who justice was for." Evelyn was silent. He looked at her now. "I came here because no one knew my name, but they made you a ghost, too." She reached out, touched his calloused hand. "No more hiding." The next morning the storm arrived, but it didn't bring snow. It brought Law. 3 men rode hard. One wore the silver star. The others had eyes like bayonets. They stopped 10 paces from the porch. "You Evelyn Morrow?" the marshal barked. She stepped forward. "I am. We've received testimony you aided enemies of the state, that you practice outlaw medicine, that you..." "I saved a dying man," she said. "A chief, who never lifted a hand against this town." The marshal narrowed his eyes. "That's not what Tiller says." Declan stepped up beside her. "Then Tiller's a coward, and a liar." The marshal looked at him. "You aiding her?" "I stand with her." A long silence followed. Then, the marshal raised his hand. The deputies moved forward, rifles raised. "Stop!" A new voice echoed through the trees. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. And then, they appeared. Painted ponies, war braids, a wall of riders cresting the ridge like a tide. Silent, watching. Evelyn gasped. The tribe. They'd come. At their front, a young man she didn't recognize dismounted. He stepped forward, bowed slightly to Evelyn. "You saved our blood," he said in accented English. "Now we ride for yours." The marshal stepped back. "I don't want war." "Then leave," the young warrior said. "This woman is not your enemy." A long pause. Then, the marshal sighed. "Let's go." And like that, they left. No gunfight. No smoke, just silence. That night, Evelyn and Declan stood by the fire again. He held her hand. She looked up at him. "They'll come back. Different names, different flags." He nodded. "Then we'll build stronger." She leaned against him. "I'm not afraid anymore," he smiled. "Good." And behind them, the fire glowed bright in the cabin window. Not destruction, but warmth. A life lit by choice, not shame. A new beginning. Together. It started with a bell, faint and distant, swinging above the chapel door. It hadn't rung in over 3 years. Not since the last wedding. The one Evelyn watched from a distance, hidden behind the lace curtain of her rented room, her hands trembling with the weight of what she'd never have, until now. The wind was cold that morning, sharp enough to carry whispers across Main Street. "They're doing it here? Why not in the canyon, where the Indians saved her? She's not even one of us." Evelyn heard them, and she smiled anyway. She wore no veil, no lace, just her mother's leather boots, a hand-stitched cream dress, and a braid wrapped in wild sage. Her scar, the one that had once cost her everything, was bare in the sunlight. Declan stood at the other end of the street beside the chapel's wooden steps, not inside, not hidden. He stood where all could see. Behind him, no choir, no preacher, just a ring of townsfolk, quiet, shifting, unsure. And then, the chief arrived. Not the one she saved. He had passed in the night weeks earlier. But his son came, wrapped in deer hide, feathers braided in his hair. He nodded once to Evelyn. She bowed her head. Together, they walked, one step at a time, toward Declan, toward a promise neither of them had believed they would live long enough to make. Halfway down the street, Evelyn slowed. Her breath caught. She looked around. The stairs, the silence, the weight of it all. Every whispered name, every door slammed in her face. Every doctor who called her a witch, every man who looked through her, every woman who pitied her. It all settled on her shoulders until Declan stepped down and met her halfway in front of everyone. He reached for her hand. "Evelyn," he said, voice calm, eyes unwavering. "I've stood with you in snow, in silence, in the dark. Now let me stand with you in the sun." She let the breath go, then took his hand, and the town saw it. Not a scandal, not a ghost, a choice. They didn't say vows, didn't need to. They just looked at one another and nodded. The chief raised his hand, spoke in Apache, then translated. He is hers, she is his. In the way of the wind, not owned, but trusted. Not bound, but chosen. A few in the crowd wept. One clapped, then another, and the bell rang again. Later that night, Evelyn sat on the porch of the cabin. The fire inside crackled low. Declan carved a horse figurine, the same shape as Hope, their foal now grown. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Stars blanketed the sky, wild and wide. She placed her hand on her stomach and smiled. 3 months later, a child was born, a girl with fierce eyes and dark hair. They named her Willa, after the chief who died with peace on his lips and her name on his breath. The town changed, not fast, but enough. Evelyn's apothecary reopened. Women who once whispered now came with quiet questions. Children ran past her porch, laughing. Some still stared, but she no longer looked away. And in the spring, when the Mustangs returned to graze in the valley, one stood apart from the herd. It watched her, unmoving, silent, until it turned, flicked its tail, and vanished into the hills. Evelyn placed a hand on the doorframe of her cabin. Declan stood behind her, arms around her waist, their daughter resting on his shoulder. She whispered, "We're not ghosts anymore." "No," he said, pressing his lips to her temple. "We're legend." And that's how the scarred frontier nurse, the ex-lawman, and the tribe they were told to fear rewrote a town story. Not with bullets, but with grit, love, and the fire to stand tall. Now that you've heard her story, I'd love to know. What did it make you feel? Did something in her journey stay with you? Let me know in the comments. Your words mean more than you know.